most women become mothers. And yet we're told that the core sort of desiderata of feminism are a set of aspirations which just fundamentally, conceptually exclude this whole domain of experience. Like, what gives? This doesn't seem to make sense. And so, I mean, that sort of led me into questioning the idea of liberal individualism, and beyond really the feminist difficulties with it.
Hello, and welcome to Inside Policy Talks, the podcast in the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. I'm Peter Copeland, Deputy Director of Domestic Policy here at MLI. We live in a time of mounting cultural confusion. Social roles are in flux, technology fragments our attention, and the idea of human nature itself is up for debate. And beneath our daily political debates lies a deeper set of issues, a broken picture of the basic elements of the world and of us humans and our place in it. Are we just collections of small parts, infinitely malleable and divisible? Meat Lego, as our guest would call it, ready to be arranged and rearranged through technology in the pursuit of individual aims and all aspects of life commodified in the pursuit? Or are we more embodied and interdependent, with a nature more given than constructed than we like to think? Until we grapple with these basic questions about the worldviews animating our lives, many of our most important debates, from gender to productivity, family to freedom, will keep missing the mark. And that's why I'm especially thrilled to welcome today's guest. Mary Harrington is a columnist at Unheard and the author of Feminism Against Progress. She's one of the most incisive voices challenging core aspects of the dominant modern Western worldview, from its assumptions about autonomy and equality to its blind spots around embodiment, gender, and the limits of technology. Her work is very interesting, sits at the intersection of politics, philosophy, and culture, and always points back to the central question: what does it mean to flourish as a human being today? Before we get started, I have to remind people to please remember to like and subscribe. It really helps us reach more people with these ideas. Mary, thanks so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Let's get right into it, Mary. So your work is deeply critical of the ideas of progress, technocracy, and individualism. Do you think the modern Western worldview, characterized chiefly by liberalism, has run out of steam?
To answer that, I'd have to define liberalism. I think we might be here for a while.
Let's start with that.
Oh God, no, we might be here for a while. I do think the modern Western worldview hasn't run out of steam, in that modernity, in the classical sense of the era which began with the printing press, has, in my view, come to an end. We're now in a new era, driven by a new information revolution. The digital revolution, which has a different character. And that revolution is, I think, one of the driving forces which is prompting the current reevaluation of the cluster of ideas and beliefs and assumptions that we characterize as liberalism. But it hasn't run it. But the modern Western world hasn't run out of steam, in the sense that all of those onward marches of technology and all of those economic forces which have been driving the world, successively through different phases and political developments and crises and so on, haven't just abruptly gone away because we invented smartphones, right? Things are developing in new directions, but the onward march of technology has not stopped just because it's come up with a new information medium. So the answer is, as always, I'm an English literature graduate, so the answer is always yes and no. Yes, but also no.
Right.
So I mean, we could take those claims one at a time.
Mm-hmm.
When I say the cluster of ideas that we characterize as liberalism, I would argue that what gets sort of bandied about in political theory departments, and latterly in the contemporary political conversation as liberalism. I mean, it has a number of different strands that weave together in it, not least classical components and Christian, a strong Christian individualism and belief in human dignity. I think is an important and potent strand that runs through what developed into liberalism. But another absolutely critical component in the emergence of the sort of Whiggish iteration of liberalism was the printing press. The sort of 1,000 RPM version of that story, the printing press was invented, and downstream of that came an information revolution, which something, then we got the Reformation, we got the 30 Years' War, we got the modern nation state, we got the scientific revolution, industrialization, and now here we are. So, I mean, we could be in. And in the course of that, which I've just given you at 1,000 RPM, all of those social, cultural, technological transformations completely rewrote the world. Relative to the reality picture and the thought world and the social and political architectures of the Middle Ages, which evolved, I would argue, much more slowly. And all of this was downstream of the printing press and the modes of communication and the cumulative accretion of knowledge which became possible once print was able to duplicate, transmit information much more quickly. I mean, just to give you a sense of how profound that is, the idea of of a public, as in the public conversation, the public sphere, the public debate, and so on, is derived from the word publishing, which is itself inextricable from the printing press. Things were not published; things were copied pre Gutenberg. So the idea that we have of a public, which is inextricable from the idea of deliberative democracy. The idea of a deliberative individual who's well informed and takes a thoughtful, objective view of the world and the political situation in order to participate democratically in the emergence of the general will is just as inextricable from the communication medium, the downstream of Gutenberg. All of this stuff. Liberalism really is print culture, is the too long didn't read version of what I'm saying. Liberalism is print culture, or at least you can have a variant of those ideals, but they'll play out very differently if you can't mass reproduce and communicate your ideas.
Yeah.
You don't have a public, in essence, if you don't have publishing.
This comes through really strongly in your work. You're critiquing feminism that, look, we really have to look to the changing material circumstances, technology in particular, to see how it freed up a whole bunch of time and space for new modes of life to emerge. And I suppose if we're linking modernity with liberalism here, and the technological mix that made it up, now we're in a very different era, digital era, which you just started to describe. And so, yeah, I certainly agree. Not run out of steam in many respects, but in others, it seems like concepts are no longer suited.
Absolutely.
To the new
this is absolutely this is an argument which I made in Feminism Against Progress. Very, very briefly, that progress as an idea is a cluster of beliefs that really secularize the Christian faith in linear history, ending in death, judgment, heaven and hell, and finally the promised land. And it sort of brings that down to the material sphere and implicitly promises that through the advance of technology and the increasing material abundance, that somehow we can attain never-ending progress towards
immanentizing the eschaton.
Yes, yeah. Right, exactly. Exactly. We can immanentize the eschaton, we can realize heaven on earth. And somehow technology is going to enable us to do that through, I don't know, more freedom, more stuff, plus something progress. And the origin point for ending up writing that book was realizing that I just didn't believe in the progress anymore. I just didn't think it was a thing. Or rather, that it didn't seem to me quite as self-evident a framework for what was actually happening. I think the point at which I realized I didn't believe in progress anymore was actually the global financial crash, which kind of stands to reason, because it was a fairly brutal come down from a fairly giddy decade. Things can only get better, and really the sort of triumphalism of the end of history. If 9/11 was the beginning of the end of that that optimism. The global financial crash really was the nail in the coffin, and we've been wading through ever deepening rivers of sewage ever since. But I mean, at the risk, I don't want to I don't want to digress too far from that. The point is that where I got to in the end in thinking about what exactly did I mean by progress. And was it possible to be a feminist if you don't believe in progress? I mean, feminism and progressivism seem very intimately bound up, and really, I mean, it's difficult to dispute that feminism and progressivism are intimately bound up. Yeah, and in trying to answer that question, I came to the conclusion in the end that yes, you can be a feminist if you don't believe in progress, but you need to rethink what you mean by feminism. You need to remove it from this story of this sort of of endless improvement, this fable, I think, this myth of never-ending progress, and understand it instead in very much more sort of materialist terms. I don't want to say crypto-Marxist because I don't think I'm a crypto-Marxist, but I mean, Marx's frame of materialist analysis is hugely useful in that it just reminds you to ground whatever it is that you're talking about in the conditions that people actually live in. Not just kind of spiral away in histories of ideas. And it's absolutely, you can absolutely understand the women's movement as a series of responses, in each case quite grounded, quite localized, and sometimes contradictory internally, responses to the Industrial Revolution. In the sense that industrialization radically transformed family life, and it threw up a whole new set of very material, very physical challenges for women to do with where you work and how if you try and square that with motherhood. And these were not challenges that were nearly so front and center in the Middle Ages, because most work happened in the home. It was very much more gendered, and it was gendered in ways which took for granted the need for women to script mothering and caring into their daily lives and daily routines. No, of course, this is not to idealize the Middle Ages, which it's not as though everyone was kind of living in some kind of bucolic world where nothing ever went wrong. There were plagues and violence and the scold's bridles, and there was lots about the Middle Ages that sucked. But in terms of work-life balance, just wasn't really a problem that very many women had to grapple with. So. Mm-hmm. I don't. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, so that was how I started. That's how I got into wrestling with the questions of progress and modernity, and the impact, the shaping force of technology on how we think about ourselves and who we are and what we are. Mm-hmm. But the more time I've spent thinking about this and interrogating it, the more I've realized that this really isn't just a topic which applies to women. I mean, this is something which concerns us all, and the impact of industrialization on family life is by no means exhausts the ways in which our lives as humans have been transformed through everything which has happened downstream of modernity. And so since I wrote Feminism Against Progress, I've become as interested, perhaps even I've become as interested in the influence, really even before industrialization, of the printing press on setting the conditions for that transformation, and also the ways in which the printing press transformed how we think about who and what we are as people. Really at quite a deep metaphysical level. It drove these enormous religious upheavals. Downstream, the entirety of North America is really the sort of, in some sense, is a byproduct of that process. So the early settlers were mostly dissenters from who fell out of the religious schisms in the English-speaking world, and sometimes the European one.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd love to go there. Continue.
So these are immensely complex questions, but they go really to the heart of what we mean when we talk about liberalism, and they also go to the heart of why it is that I think it's become possible very much more very, very recently to take a step back from this whole scenario and say, well, actually, what are we talking about? And even critiques of liberalism in a way which would have been honestly unthinkable, I think, possibly even 20 years ago when I was an undergraduate.
Yeah, well, perhaps it's because we're starting to see the effects, more tangibly in society.
But I think
you've given us a few. Go ahead. Sorry.
Just that we're also a few years into a new an information revolution again, which I think is as radical as the printing press, and which offers an alternative vantage point from which to evaluate some of the ideologies which were. I forget who it was who said, a fish doesn't know very much about water, but there's a sense in which from inside print culture, it's very difficult to think critically about print culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's become very much more possible the further we've got into the digital era.
Yes, well, no, I mean the medium is the message, as a Canadian,
right.
Marshall McLuhan said, and we are now in the technological.
Noted Canadian Marshall McLuhan.
and we are now in the hyper technological era, swimming in the medium as well. Like the technology now shapes in ways that it hasn't, in the past. Every aspect of our life and how we think about ourselves, and that's fascinating that your work looks at these material conditions and how we think about ourselves as people, and then construct our political systems as a result. I want to ask you just to put a little bit more meat on the bone of what you think it is about these ideas of progress associated with liberal modernity that are no longer working, or we should never have thought that they were going to work. These ideas of kind of endless progress and technological improvement as being the kind of what will fulfill us. That we can just simply choose everything and construct our lives.
I think it's Carl Schmitt who suggests that the belief in progress over the course of modernity moves in terms of the field in which people consider progress to be occurring over the course of modernity. So in the 18th century, it was one. I forget his exact schema. I think in the 18th century it was scientific. In the 19th, it was economic, and in the 20th, it was technological. So somebody might have to correct me because I'm sort of delving into my mental archives, but I think that's his rough schema. And I mean, you could probably pick holes in the periodization, but there's something to that in terms of the zeitgeist, a sort of longer arc of zeitgeist over those different stretches. So I think when we say, what is it about the idea of progress which isn't working anymore, we again have to be a little bit more specific, because it's, if Schmitt is right in that thesis, it's the idea of progress has been through a number of iterations already, and very, very possibly this won't be the last. So that's sort of one thing to bear in mind. But in as much as, I mean, the specific iteration of, leaving that aside, the specific iteration of progress which I have a problem with, or just realized during the global financial crash that I had a problem with, is the end of history version. Just to bring it much more down into the present day. I mean, I'm old enough and wizened enough to have grown up. I mean, my first political memory was the fall of the Berlin Wall, which makes me ancient. That's the my teens happened before the internet, but during a period where it was just taken for granted that all the big geopolitical things had happened. Like, we were done. That was it. And it was genuine. I mean, it wasn't even that people really made the case for that's it. Now it's just going to be more shopping and more freedom. It was just sort of assumed somehow. I mean, I guess that I dare say there are parts of the world which were not nearly as stable and complacent as home counties England in the 1990s, but it was pretty stable and pretty complacent and pretty boring, but also comfortable and a lot less politically febrile, I think you can safely say, than Britain.
Yeah.
And part of that reality picture that I remember growing up with is this idea that we've done all we've dealt with all the big stuff. So from here on in, it's just going to be more personal freedom, greater pursuit of vaguely consumer coded pursuit of self individuation and self development, and and maybe we'll do we'll worry a bit about climate change, polar bears and ice caps, but we'll figure out a way of sorting out the environmental stuff. And capitalism is bad, but also it's nice to go shopping. I mean, it's this sort of the kind of Clintonite policy stack was just kind of taken as axiomatically self-evident.
You can use technology kind of as a technique to solve every problem, including perfecting oneself even.
Yeah, I mean, it was that I don't think anyone really, no one really imagined bioengineering ourselves, except outside science fiction. I don't think that was really a 90s
at that time. Yeah.
But everyone assumed gay rights was obviously the way forward. I remember coming across Judith Butler at university and thinking, hey, this is crazy, but also why shouldn't people just be whatever gender they want to be? And maybe that is actually plausible and a thing. Maybe this is what liberation looks like. There's something really sort of Nietzschean actually about Judith Butler's. If you try it, if you take it seriously, there's something very Nietzschean about that project.
Yeah, it's following your will, using technology and means to achieve your will, and that will deliver happiness.
But I think the sort of malign bait and switch is that actually it says if only you have the will to power to realize this, then you can become anything you want to be. But then nobody actually does, because you can't change sex.
Yes.
So it's just then you just end up with people who are really depressed and feel like failures at the project of self-fashion.
No, I think this helps.
But that's a digression.
No, this helps color it. This idea, that
so this is
we conceived it.
So this is the backdrop, I guess. And I sort of did my level best in my early 20s. I guess I got sort of one-shotted. Judith Butler comes up because I got kind of one-shotted at university by critical theory. Having had a fairly kind of recognizably classical education. Where sort of periods in history follow one another sequentially, and there's a sort of it's possible to know things coherently, and it's possible to say things that are true, and to read something and for the words to just mean what they say, and all of those weird, quaint, old-fashioned ideas about what the text actually is or does. And then I got to university and met Derrida and was just kind of borderline psychotic for a term or two, I think. No, I'm not exaggerating.
I know you've described it.
Very
yes.
kind of hallucinatory, very very hallucinatory experience. I mean, in a way, a very beautiful and amazing one, because I became sort of attuned to dimensions of reality that I just not really ever really been cognizant of before. But what was so disturbing about it was that you were simultaneously being made aware of these kind of these dimensions of meaning, and then also being told that there's no there's only power. It's a very sort of very disorienting and cruel thing to do to young people.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this has given us a good backdrop. Yeah.
So then, and fast forward through a sort of chaotic bohemian 20s, a global financial crash happened, and I just stopped being left wing, because it was. I mean, it's a long story and a very painful one, but my personal life fell apart and my business failed, and I came out the other end of that process a number of years later, having just revisited and questioned literally everything I believed up to that point, including the Clintonite policy stack, including at least some of my, not all, but some of my unquestioned beliefs about what being a nice person means, or what nice politics, what genuinely compassionate politics looks like. And came out the other end, and I think the sort of crystallization of that was just realizing that I didn't believe in progress. But
okay. Yeah, and I think a lot of people, I mean, your book, your ideas resonate with a lot of people, and we're, even if people can put their finger on it, get a sense that, some of these ideas are exhausted and they need refinement. And so we're seeing it play out in our politics. How do you see it playing out? Like, what are the manifestations of this? The UK, Canada, the US?
It depends a little bit where you are. While I was writing the book, it felt very strongly at the time that the vanguard for a lot of these issues and the battlefield on which a lot of these matters were being contested was the question of gender identity, or the idea that gender identity is even a thing was really the battlefield.
Yeah,
whether or not this is actually a real, whether or not that's real. and yeah, and it took me a while to get my ideas straight on that. I mean, I changed my name to Sebastian for a while in my 20s. I was a fully paid up butlerite for some time, and it took me It took me a while to come round to sort of thinking through the difficulties in that. Not least because there are a lot of very distressed people who struggle with trying to make sense of who they are, and questioning their gender is an aspect of that. And nobody wants to kick somebody when they're down, right? And yet these issues are tremendously complex, and seemed to me, the more I thought about it, to have ramifications that went well beyond wanting to meet somebody who's experiencing personal psychic distress and identity confusion compassionately, and help them realize a better developed sense of themselves. That actually there were wider social and political ramifications to all of these questions. And in the course of thinking all of that through, I came to think that I came to the conclusion that one of the reasons we were in this predicament, and in trying to and wrestling with these questions, was that more recently than the Industrial Revolution, we'd been through another tech transition. That in a sense, the technological vector, which began with the Industrial Revolution, had gone through industrializing the world outside us, and for very complex reasons, turned inwards to the point where we decided we'd set about industrializing ourselves. And that actually we're some 50 years or so into that trajectory, which I don't think I called it the transhuman era in the book. I called it the cyborg era. But I've come to realize that you don't need to coin a term, because actually what we're talking about is the transhumanist era. And the hinge moment, the inflection point, I've argued for that, was the legalization of the birth control pill, which is the first transhumanist technology, in the sense that it doesn't set out to restore healthy functioning in relation to a common template of normal. It sets out to break normal healthy physiology in pursuit of individual freedom. And the conclusion I came to is that the point where we start to feel that it's licit to employ biotech against our normative physiology in pursuit of individual freedom, is the point at which our up until that point broadly functional belief in progress and 20th century belief in technological progress takes on a character which is actively hostile to women, and that therefore I needed to make a feminist case against progressivism in its biotechnological form, because it seemed to me, and really this goes way beyond the whole question of transgenderism, which is just a microcosmic battlefield in which these questions are disputed. But the question of what happens, particularly to women, but also to children, when we embrace in principle the idea that we can wage war on our normative physiology in pursuit of freedom or profit, we open up an absolute Pandora's box of nightmares. And I mean, the horror stories are, you get a cascade of them. Forcible commercial. There are women being kept on what are effectively breeding farms in far-flung and impoverished corners of the world, where they're forced to carry children for the commercial surrogacy industry. These have been real stories which have happened, and all of this is downstream of the acceptance in principle that it's licit to commodify the human body through biotech in the name of individual freedom. Because the moment you open up the moment you open up something to the market, whether it's a natural resource in the world or the human body itself, but the moment you open it up to technological control, it's also open to the market. Just absolutely without fail, the two go together.
Yeah, just what you've described, it really brings together nicely the confluence of some of these values, like the primacy of individual freedom and choice on the one hand, progressivism's boundary transgression and kind of boundary erasure, the primacy of subjectivity and rendering all choices subjectively determined equal, and then harnessing the new technology to do so. And some very interesting examples of how it's appearing in our politics and policy. For birth control, you mentioned one. What are some of the other ways in which we see this transhumanist, this kind of will to progress through technological modification appear? I can think of a lot of things that pertain to the human person, like surrogacy you mentioned, even some stuff around assisted dying and euthanasia, gender identity. Obviously, I'd love to hear what you think. Where is this appearing?
Yeah, I mean, these are all excellent examples. Surely the most well-developed terrain in which this is obviously happening is industries that are developed around reproduction. You know, you might want to include the whole panoply of. I mean, assisted reproductive technologies it depends on how you. Well, I mean, how absolutist you want to be about that probably depends on how Catholic your commitments are. I mean, I'm ambivalent on that. Okay, I'll take a step back. For me, the relevant heuristic, taking a step back from individual specifics of technologies, is does this set out to restore something that isn't working properly, relative to a commonly accepted template for what normal healthy physiology, normal healthy human functioning looks like, or does this set out to transcend, to break, to overcome, to interfere with, to re-engineer that template, in pursuit of some other end, individual freedom, or. I mean, so for example, Peter Thiel's enhanced games is a very interesting edge case there, because it's a pro-doping game. So in a sense, it really is butting up against the whole field of transhumanism. But you could argue, and technologists do argue, that using performance enhancing drugs to make an athlete run faster or be able to lift heavier weights or whatever isn't really different in kind. It's not radically different in kind from
a physiological perspective.
Right, but because it's all still ordered to human excellence, which is recognizably sort of cognate with the normative template of human physiological functioning. But if, for example, you were to say an athlete could cut off his legs and replace them with I don't know wheels, in order to compete in the enhanced games, then I think what you'd be doing there, the kind of intervention you'd be making there in order to in order to compete would be different in kind, because at that point, you've another example I could give away would be, so I have a dental implant. I had an accident. I lost a tooth. I have a dental implant. Is that a transhumanist technology or not? I spent a long time thinking about this, and in the end, I concluded, yes, at one level I have a cyborg tooth, but at another level, what that does isn't massively different in kind from, say, if I had a bridge or another kind of prosthesis there instead. And what it's doing is restoring something relative to the normative template of how many teeth you'd expect Mary to have. So in a sense, it's a restorative rather than a meliorist technology. But if I asked my dentist to give me a dental implant and include a CB radio in my tooth, that would be transhumanist.
Yeah, this is great, and this will take us directly to meat Lego and human nature, which we want to talk about. But no, this line in bioethics, at least the kind I would subscribe to, that safeguards human dignity rather than erodes it, between therapy and ameliorism is I think crucial, because if human dignity lies in some sense in the recognition and acceptance of ourselves, which I think it must in a certain sense, then this is very antithetical to it, and really it does matter the purpose and the motivations of the person and the doctors and all of these different settings.
And I think one of the areas which is most difficult to talk about or most difficult to name, because it's been so comprehensively excluded from the picture in order for science as such to develop, is the idea of a normative, of anything having a normative nature.
Yes.
which and this is so interesting, particularly in the context of medicine, because doctors can't really practice without a sense of what normal health looks like.
Yes.
It's not really possible to study to become a doctor without learning about human physiology and the normative developmental pathways for a human, and the temperatures, like the four vital signs, for example, all of which actually exist within a pretty narrow range. All of it is tacitly premised on the idea that normatively, physiologically speaking, and really emotionally as well, we have a nature. And yet, the entirety of modern medicine also employs a scientific paradigm which officially, at least, discards the idea that anything has a nature in order to be able to act instrumentally on and work experimentally with and so on. So it's constantly in this sort of with one foot with one foot in across two different worlds. Yeah. And I've often wondered whether this is one of the reasons why medical students famously drink so much. It's just a very schizophrenic place to be. On the one hand, you're learning to do all of these things because you're a compassionate person, you want to heal people and make them better. On the other hand, you have to cut corpses open. It's a very schizophrenic place to be.
Yeah. I suppose it's again, if you're safeguarding that dignity or whether you're serving other aims. But tell us about Meet Lego. Meet Lego is how you describe the vision of the person that's emerging under this technocratic.
Yeah. So I think. I suppose just sort of we can segue nicely from here in the sense that Meet Lego is how humans show up in the world if we discard the idea of a normative human nature altogether. At that point, the human body, the human person, just becomes completely subject to the Baconian project of dissection and experimentation, and potentially reordering or re-engineering, or otherwise subject to instrumental mastery towards any end you like. Really, the betterment. I think the betterment of man's estate. I think that was the relief of man's estate, I think, is the phrase. If you or any other end you like, however you want to define the relief of man's estate, you can cut people open or do what you like, really. And under those once you and really when I talk about human nature, I mean at the risk of abruptly doing a 90-degree turn into metaphysics, what I'm talking about is formal and final cause.
Yeah.
Which is do we have time for this? Is this
yes? No, definitely
a rabbit hole to go down?
No.
Okay. This is a sidebar that I didn't really get to in the book, but I've had occasion to grapple with a little bit more since, because I realised that actually the reason all of this stuff is so difficult to talk about is precisely because, in order for the scientific revolution to happen, modern scientific research discarded two of the four ways in which the medievals, drawing on Aristotle, believed things to be caused, believed things came to be what they were in the world. So for the ancients, there are four ways in which a thing was caused. So there's the efficient cause, which is to say the forces that act on it. There's the material cause, which is the stuff it's made of. But then there's also the formal cause, which is the shape of the form of the thing, and the final cause, which is its purpose. And the scientific method comes into being by discarding the idea that things have a form and things have a purpose, and focusing only on the stuff that it's made of and the forces which are acting on it. And the entirety of the modern scientific paradigm, out of which the technological mindset and our entire technological world emerges, comes from first bracketing initially, and then really ultimately discarding altogether the idea that things have a form and things have a purpose. And I think what I've come to think as I've delved via the feminist rabbit hole into this very kind of, I suppose, much more metaphysical way of thinking about technology, is that the reason it's so difficult to get a grip on or articulate some of the natural and instinctive protests people have to being objectified and thought of and sort of addressed, interpolated as Meet Lego, come from the deep instinctive sense we have that humans do have a form. This is the normative template of physical health which doctors learn about in order to be able to do what they do, and also that we have a purpose. I think people would probably, we could be here all day arguing about what that is, but very, very crudely, we might say human flourishing is adequate as a sort of peg to hang that on. There's a normative human physiological form, with developmental pathways, and and we are, broadly speaking, all configured roughly the same. And our purpose, and we could say our purpose is human flourishing. And all of that is structurally excluded. It's a deliberate blind spot within the scientific paradigm.
The current one.
Sorry?
The current one, but anyway.
The current one. If you have optimistic news on that front, then I'm rather.
Yeah, well, no, I do just want to mention a few things, because I think, when you look at the formal cause, information like DNA, for example, can be conceived of this way. Final causes as well. You've noted the inescapable use of it in explanatory fashion in biology. But there have been some discoveries in physics, biology, neuroscience that point toward top-down causation, phase transitions between liquid and water and gas being affected by holistic properties of the systems. And quantum physics especially seems to suggest that there is actually at the smallest level, it's not all just atoms all the way down and particles, but the particles are indeterminate. They don't have a state and properties until actualized, and they're actualized by properties of larger systems. So it all suggests, I think, that in fact contemporary science suggests that some of these things, formal and final cause, are in fact very much present in our explanatory causal frameworks. But I don't think the philosophy and its manifestation in some of our cultural dialogues has yet caught up. And it is certainly you can't necessarily make a direct inference to that this proves that, but it certainly is quite suggestive, and many people have said as much. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
William Gibson said, "The future is already here; it's just not evenly distributed."
There you go. Yeah.
I think you can probably. It's probably fair to say, even if cutting edge science has grasped that, for example, matter is not tiny orbiting blobs of stuff. I saw a kids TV show about atoms, as targeted at children my daughter's age, was animating little orbiting balls of stuff with smiley faces on. So to teaching children this is what the substrate of reality looks like. The legacy beliefs about this are so deeply entrenched that even if cutting edge science has come to the conclusion that in fact the universe is not, as Newton thought, made of solid, massy, tiny particulate balls of stuff. It's going to take a lot longer for pop culture to get their heads around that. And who knows what the pop version of theoretical physics will look like.
Fair.
I think when you start talking about formal cause, and you think about there are subtle, in exactly the terms that you've just characterized it. There are absolutely scientific developments which point towards, for example, the top-down causation being, things being affected by the properties of entire systems. And then you think, well, what would that look like? What would it sound like if you told that story to a 5-year-old? What does that story sound like in terms that make sense to a 5-year-old?
I think it's like, the heart beats for the sake of the body and the organs. You see it in biological systems, and even at the explanatory level, there isn't like causal closure in our materialist picture there. You have to you have to explain it. It's always embedded in larger purposes, so to speak. And
it's interesting. I suppose the point I'm trying to make is it's interesting to think about how quickly you end up retrieving what are fundamentally sort of medieval type accounts of what reality looks like once you need to communicate what is in fact a very complex scientific picture of top-down causation to people who are perhaps not specialists or particularly bookish.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I do think like genuinely on the one hand, much of contemporary science does point in this way to kind of the recovery of this manifest image, this idea that in fact, our everyday picture of ourselves is more or less right, and we're not, crazy radical intellectuals who think, in fact, none of that is true, which is actually you can't even operate and function properly in society that way. Yet that's how the professional managerial class and many intellectuals, they have this deep cynicism because they've imbibed a metaphysical picture of the world that then colors everything else that is so radically inhuman, and it's so like I just think it's completely false too. But there is this question, that many people still think, well, this sounds nice, but it's scientifically nonsense, and I think, in fact, on the contrary, there's a lot of signs that no, it's just not. It's quite plausible, but I think there's probably a lot of refinements to be made because, as you suggest, you never just go back and retrieve something that it was not complete, it was not comprehensive enough. But yeah.
So it's eminently possible that we might end up back at things have a nature and actually it was all made by God.
That's how I operate, and I think it's how a lot of people operate actually, and they're doing just fine.
We are all, in fact, eternal ideas in the mind of God. And this is just the most straightforward way of explaining it.
Well, yeah, many people believe that too. That's for sure. So, but let's talk about this idea of autonomy here and choice and how it colors so much of what we do, and it is very much part of the kind of the will part of the human part of this technological frame. A lot of your writing challenges this idea of autonomy, as though we're minds kind of independent of our bodies. So why is embodiment so central to your critique of, in particular, gender and family ideologies?
Well, I mean, this really this is again very much a feminist critique. In this respect, it isn't even a particularly original one. I mean, it's been observed by both feminists and anti-feminists that the individualist ideal liberal subject is just not as comfortable a fit for women as for men.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Rousseau wasn't entirely wrong when he said, when he suggested that only men should be treated as liberal subjects in this way, and women should be raised to be sort of charming, fertile support humans. And this, obviously, this is not what I'm suggesting that we should do. This is obviously not what I'm endorsing as an appropriate life path for women. But he's right in the sense that the idea of a radically autonomous, free individual who's free to who chart their own life path is just a much poorer fit with women, where women want to be mothers. And I mean, this was something that I just realized in a very embodied way. I mean, to use the cringe term, lived experience. That this really was just a very literally visceral lived experience when I had a child. At which point I realized that all of the ways which I just assumed individual freedom was the ultimate good that I ought to be striving for, and was really the core sort of desideratum of the feminism which I'd imbibed as part of the Clinton era policy stack, just was a terrible fit for being a mum. Mm-hmm. I mean, you spend 9 months being not quite one person and not quite two people either, which is just a very strange experience from the sort of liberal individualistic perspective. For all kinds of reasons. Suddenly you're constrained in what you can eat or what you can wear, or even how comfortable. I mean, I don't recommend to anybody who's planning to have children trying to paint the banisters on a large staircase around a 7-month pregnancy bump. Just don't try it. Plan otherwise.
Yes.
Don't do it. It's difficult. Your proprioception, everything changes, and you're just sort of not fully yourself. And what really surprised me, was how long that lasts after your child is nominally at least physically separate from you. You go on feeling as though they're still in a very sort of felt way part of your body for absolutely ages. I mean, I don't think that sense of being sort of coextensive somehow with my daughter really slackened meaningfully for months, if not like a year and a half, for ages. Absolutely, that's not like I was helicoptering all of the time. There were times I was like, "Please take my baby, I need to sleep."
Yeah.
You being separated for long becomes acutely uncomfortable and sort of distressing. And yeah, it's like having grown an extra limb, which is then bizarrely somehow physically separate from you, but you're still aware of it as if it was still part of your own body. And that's, as an experience, that just didn't map in any meaningful way at all onto this idea of an autonomous liberal subject. So I was thinking, okay, so there's this entire dimension of experience which actually, the majority of women undergo. Most women become mothers, and yet we're told that the core sort of desiderata of feminism are a set of aspirations which just fundamentally, conceptually exclude this whole domain of experience. Like, what gives? This doesn't seem to make sense. And so, I mean, that sort of led me into questioning the idea of liberal individualism, and beyond really the feminist difficulties with it, which are many and complex. Questioning how well it fits with being a physically embodied person as such, which all of us are, obviously, and thence to the transhumanist aspiration to upload ourselves into the cloud. And I mean, that goes off down a whole other rabbit hole about what ourselves even are. Which
No, this is the
we maybe don't have time for today.
No, it's a really beautiful example. I mean, it's the most beautiful thing in life. I think people have a chance to experience it. Seeing a pregnant woman and deliver her baby, and it is a perfect example of showing the inadequacies of the frame of flourishing, even of individual autonomy. Because yes, there is a great deal of hardship and suffering and toil, but as I'm sure you'd agree, it's what and all of the dependencies and the shared burdens that come with that when it goes well, right? Like, barring that, are what make life most. This is the best form of life when we're dependent
Right.
like that, and when we're sharing, and we're codependent, interdependent, all of these sorts of things. And so we've done a lot diagnosing here some of the ills, and pointed towards some of the ways in which there's a richer conception of human nature, one in which interdependence and recognition of our nature and where it might lead us. How we might let's think now about how we might our political structures or political philosophies might change to better accommodate that.
I sort of feel like that question has it backwards a little bit, in the sense that our political philosophies are changing anyway. Um, for a host of reasons, not least the information revolution um, and there's probably I sort of feel, for the same crypto Marxist reasons as I ended up with that analysis of the women's movement to begin with. I sort of feel like we have limited agency at the macro level to shape that in the name of one particular agenda, not least because the question of what is or isn't in women's interests, or even in the interests of embodied humans, of either sex, is very context specific. And I'm loath to propose universalist solutions, because I sort of feel like that's kind of part of the problem, not part of the solution.
Let's talk about UK and Canada.
Okay.
Let's talk about the UK and Canada.
But with all of those caveats in mind, it seems to me that the changes, great upheavals afoot across the West, probably across the world in general, and we will better be able to meet them in ways which do all of those good things which you just named, if we keep in mind and do our level best to keep in mind, to surface, to find language to describe and name that picture of human nature as being something which is real. That's not just a theory. That it's not just and the fact that it's discernible only if you like out of the corner of your eye, through pattern recognition and through apprehension rather than through analysis, doesn't mean it's not real. It's nonetheless real, and it's true, and and a toddler can see it. I mean, a toddler can tell the difference with 90% accuracy between men and women. You know, and there are countless other ways in which by the time we're 2 or 3, we know what human normal looks like. It's right there. It's obvious. We just have to, but we need to keep that. We need to keep human normal front and center, even if we end up arguing about edge cases, even if we end up arguing about it at the margins. We will be better able to weather the immense upheavals that we're going through already, if we keep that picture at the heart of any change that we set about trying to make. And also keep in mind the reality that picture of human normal is irreducibly dual. It's not just one template, it's two.
Yeah. Yes. No, they are different. They are different. Okay, finally, Mary, do you see signs of renewal intellectually, spiritually, culturally?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, tell me.
Absolutely. I mean, the academy has some well documented challenges in terms of academic freedom and so on. But in terms of, I mean, the intellectual life, I think, is livelier.
Yes.
Or livelier and more creative today than at any point I can think of in my adult life. Some of it's gone feral. I mean, I think there are unfortunately some institutions where the genuine nerds have been methodically managed at. But the guys who would be scholars, whatever the circumstances, are still being scholars because that's just who they are. It's just that they've gone rogue. They're all in Discord servers or surviving somehow. I don't know, getting jobs as gardeners so they can read books in the evening. Like those guys just go feral.
Yeah.
But they don't stop thinking because that's what they do. And actually, I think that substrate of rogue scholars is doing very interesting things to intellectual life, and is bringing in some patchy ways and some sketchy ways a real shot in the arm to an academic discourse which in some places have got quite stale and quite inward looking. Present company obviously accepted.
Well, I was going to say, I'm going to have to tell you that you're definitely a leading edge of that, and it's not just two people who work in the space of ideas saying that ideas are very important. But I know it's amazing to see just in the past few years where some of these discussions would have been you'd be cancelled, and you though are pre-cancelled. I know you've pre-cancelled yourself. Stuff you said, it's amazing to see. It's very positive, and ideas do have an impact. That's certainly what we believe here at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. So I want to thank you so much, Mary, for joining us. Tell us before you go where people can find you and what you're up to right now and next.
Sure. I'm on x.com at Moving Circles. I publish a regular Substack, that's maryharrington.co.uk. My weekly column is at Unheard, unheard.com, the UK current affairs magazine.
Mm-hmm.
I show up in other magazines at regular intervals. I'm working, the next book will be on the printing press and the digital revolution, which I think is really a counter-revolution. It's a putsch. And the title will, I think, be The King of the Swarm. That will come out the year after next, hopefully, if I get a wiggle on.
Very good. Well, thanks so much for taking the time, Mary. I'm Peter Copeland.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Inside Policy Talks. Thanks for joining us.